The phone rang at 11:47 p.m. on a January night in Anchorage, cutting through the silence like a blade. Outside, snow fell in thick curtains, muffling the sounds of the city and wrapping the world in an eerie quiet that made even familiar places feel ominous. Sarah Mitchell, head nurse at Providence, Alaska Medical Center's psychiatric unit, was reviewing patient charts when the phone's shrill ring jolted her from her paperwork. She answered with the practiced calm of someone who'd fielded countless crisis calls over her 15-year career. "We have a problem," came the shaky voice of Dr. Amanda Torres, the night shift psychiatrist. Her usual professional composure was cracked, revealing something that sounded dangerously close to panic. "It's about Rebecca Walsh." Rebecca Walsh. The name sent a chill down Sarah's spine that had nothing to do with the Alaskan winter. For 3 years, Rebecca had been their most trusted psychiatric nurse, the one who could calm the most violent patients with nothing more than her voice, who worked double shifts without complaint, who seemed to genuinely care about healing broken minds in ways that impressed even the most seasoned doctors. Sarah had personally recommended Rebecca for the unit's most challenging cases. She'd watched Rebecca talk down patients in psychotic episodes, comfort grieving families, and provide a level of care that went far beyond what was required. Rebecca was more than just a good nurse. She was exceptional. "What kind of problem?" Sarah asked, though something in her gut already knew the answer wouldn't be simple. In her experience, problems involving exceptional people were never simple. "She didn't show up for her shift," Dr. Torres continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "You know Rebecca, she's never missed a shift in 3 years. Never even been late without calling. When she didn't answer her phone, I called her apartment manager to do a wellness check." Sarah felt her stomach begin to twist. "And? There's blood on her door, Sarah. Fresh blood. And her apartment, it looks like someone left in a hurry. Or was taken." The line went quiet except for the sound of Sarah's heart hammering against her ribs. In the psychiatric ward, when someone like Rebecca disappears, it's never just a disappearance. Their work brought them into contact with dangerous people, patients with histories of violence, family members driven to desperation, criminals seeking drugs or revenge. But Rebecca was careful. She followed protocols, maintained professional boundaries, never took unnecessary risks. If something had happened to her, it meant someone had specifically targeted her. Someone who knew her routines, her vulnerabilities, her secrets. "Have you called building security?" Sarah asked, already reaching for her coat. "Checked the parking garage cameras?" "The police are on their way," Dr. Torres replied. "But Sarah, there's something else. I went through the schedule to see who she was supposed to work with tonight. 3 of her regular patients are missing from their rooms." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. 3 patients missing. Rebecca gone. Blood on her door. The pieces of a nightmare were falling into place. "Which patients?" Sarah demanded, though part of her already knew the answer would make everything worse. "Marcus Chin, Thomas Garrett, and David Volkov." Sarah closed her eyes. 3 of the unit's most dangerous patients. All men with histories of violence. All patients Rebecca had specifically requested to work with despite their challenging behaviors and the administration's initial reluctance. "Call the police," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "Call them now. And call Dr. Harrison. He needs to know that this isn't just a missing person case." But what they would discover over the next 72 hours would shake the entire medical community in Alaska. Rebecca Walsh, the woman trusted with the most vulnerable minds in the state, had been living a double life that would end in murder. And the blood on her door was just the beginning of a trail that would lead investigators into the darkest corners of human psychology. 6 months earlier, Rebecca Walsh had been the pride of Providence's psychiatric unit. At 32, She possessed an almost supernatural ability to connect with patients others had given up on. Her colleagues often described her as having the touch, that indefinable quality that separated good nurses from great ones. Dr. Michael Harrison, the unit's chief psychiatrist, often told colleagues about the time Rebecca talked down James Morrison, a schizophrenic patient who'd been in a violent episode for 18 hours straight. Morrison had already injured 2 orderlies and broken 3 restraints. The psychiatric team had been debating whether to sedate him heavily or transfer him to a more secure facility. Then Rebecca appeared in Morrison's doorway. "James," she said softly, her voice cutting through his screaming like a lullaby through chaos. "I know you're scared. I know the voices are telling you terrible things. But I need you to look at me." Within minutes of Rebecca entering his room, James was calm, medicated voluntarily, and asking for his mother. The transformation was so complete that Dr. Harrison had reviewed the security footage multiple times, trying to understand exactly what Rebecca had done differently. "She has this way of seeing past the illness to the person underneath," Dr. Harrison would say to anyone who would listen. "It's a gift." Rebecca's personal life seemed equally stable and admirable. She lived alone in a modest apartment in the Tennigan neighborhood, kept a small garden on her balcony where she grew herbs for tea, and was pursuing her master's degree in psychiatric nursing through online courses. She volunteered at Brother Francis Shelter every other weekend, working with homeless individuals who often struggled with mental health issues. Her colleagues respected her professional judgment. Her patients adored her. The administration pointed to her as an example of what modern psychiatric nursing could accomplish. Rebecca's performance evaluations were exemplary. "Demonstrates exceptional empathy and professional boundaries," read her most recent review. "Shows innovative approaches to patient care while maintaining strict adherence to protocols. Recommended for advancement." But underneath the surface of this perfect life, something dark had been growing for months. It started with small things that seemed admirable at first. Rebecca began volunteering for the night shifts more frequently, claiming she wanted to provide continuity of care for her most challenging patients. She was often found in patient rooms during off hours, reading to them or simply sitting quietly while they slept. Other nurses noticed she developed particularly close relationships with certain male patients, specifically those with histories of violence or severe trauma. She seemed to understand them in ways that impressed even the most experienced staff members. Dr. Torres first raised concerns during a November staff meeting, 3 months before Rebecca's disappearance. "I've observed Rebecca bringing personal items to patients," she told Dr. Harrison and the senior nursing staff. "Books, magazines, even food from outside the hospital." When I asked her about it, she said she was trying to make their environment more comforting. Sarah Mitchell had noticed it too. She's also been staying late to talk with patients after her shifts end, sometimes for hours. "I found her in Marcus Chen's room at midnight last week, just sitting with him while he couldn't sleep." Dr. Harrison dismissed their concerns with the confidence of someone who'd seen positive results. Rebecca cares about these people in ways that go beyond the typical professional relationship. Sometimes caring means being flexible with the rules. Her methods are unorthodox, but her results speak for themselves. Looking back, it was a decision he would regret for the rest of his career. The truth was, Rebecca had been carefully cultivating relationships that went far beyond appropriate professional boundaries. She'd been studying her patients not as a nurse studies symptoms, but as a predator studies prey. And she'd been very, very good at hiding it. Among Rebecca's patients was 38-year-old Marcus Chen, a former software engineer whose brilliant mind had been shattered by tragedy. 2 years earlier, Marcus had been driving home from work during a blizzard when his car skidded on black ice and collided with another vehicle. His wife, Jennifer, and 6-year-old daughter, Lily, died instantly. Marcus survived without a scratch. The guilt destroyed him completely. Within months of the accident, Marcus had lost his job, his home, and his grip on reality. He'd been hospitalized multiple times for suicide attempts, each one more elaborate and determined than the last. He'd been diagnosed with severe PTSD, major depression, and had developed increasingly violent tendencies toward anyone who tried to help him. "I don't deserve to live when they died," he would tell anyone who would listen. "Every breath I take is stealing air from them." Marcus had cycled through dozens of therapists and nurses. Most lasted only a few sessions before requesting transfers or refusing to work with him. His anger was volcanic, unpredictable, and often directed at the people trying hardest to help him. "Everyone except Rebecca. She understands me," Marcus would tell his court-appointed attorney weeks later. "She knew what it felt like to lose everything. She didn't try to tell me it would get better or that I needed to move on. She just understood." What Marcus didn't know, what no one knew, was that Rebecca had been secretly visiting him in his secured room after hours, sometimes arriving as late as 2 a.m. and staying until dawn. She'd bring him books about grief, articles about survivor's guilt, and most importantly, validation for his darkest thoughts. "The system wants you to pretend to be better," she would whisper during these midnight visits. "They want you to take medications that numb your pain because your honest grief makes them uncomfortable. But I know the truth. Some pain is too deep to heal. Some guilt is deserved." Rebecca had given Marcus her personal phone number, telling him to call if he ever felt lost in the darkness. She'd arranged for him to have extended recreation time in areas of the hospital normally off-limits to psychiatric patients. She'd even helped him write letters to his dead wife and daughter, encouraging him to express the rage and self-hatred that his therapists wanted him to overcome. Security footage would later reveal Rebecca entering Marcus's room at unauthorized hours on 17 separate occasions over a 3-month period. Each time, she disabled the room's monitoring systems by claiming they needed maintenance or had technical difficulties. But Marcus wasn't her only inappropriate relationship. Thomas Garrett, a 45-year-old former construction foreman, had been admitted after a psychotic break triggered by chronic traumatic brain injury from multiple concussions. His history included domestic violence charges, assault convictions, and a restraining order from his ex-wife who claimed he'd threatened to kill her and their 2 teenage sons. Thomas's brain injury had left him with severe mood swings, paranoid delusions, and explosive rage that could be triggered by the smallest perceived slight. He'd attacked 3 different nurses during his first week at Providence, requiring heavy sedation and physical restraints. But with Rebecca, Thomas was different. Almost gentle. "She told me I wasn't crazy," Thomas would later tell investigators, his voice soft with something that sounded like love. "She said my brain was injured, not broken. She said I deserved better than being locked up and drugged into submission." Rebecca had arranged for Thomas to have access to the hospital's workshop area, where he could work with his hands, despite the obvious safety risks of giving a violent patient access to tools. She'd helped him contact his estranged brother in Seattle, against explicit medical advice that his family maintain no contact during treatment. Most dangerously, she'd encouraged Thomas's paranoid beliefs about his ex-wife and the legal system. "They painted you as the monster to protect themselves," she would tell him during their private conversations. "They couldn't handle a real man who wouldn't be controlled. But I see who you really are underneath all their lies." Rebecca Walsh wasn't just breaking protocol, she was systematically dismantling the psychological defenses that kept dangerous men contained. She was building an army of damaged, violent patients who saw her as their only ally in a world that had abandoned them. And she was very good at making them believe that she was the only person who had ever truly understood their pain. On December 15th, Marcus Chen vanished from the psychiatric unit during what should have been the most secure shift of the day. The morning shift change at Providence was deliberately designed to prevent exactly this kind of incident. Multiple staff members were present, security checkpoints required electronic badges and biometric scans, and every patient was accounted for during a mandatory bed check at 7 a.m. But somehow, Marcus Chen had simply evaporated. The official incident report, filed by Head of Security Jim Morrison, documented a series of what appeared to be random system failures. Marcus's room card reader had malfunctioned at 6:47 a.m., requiring manual override. The hallway camera covering his corridor had experienced a brief technical glitch between 6:52 and 7:03 a.m. And the backup security guard who should have been monitoring the electronic systems had been called away to deal with what turned out to be a false alarm in the pharmacy. An internal investigation led by the hospital's risk management team found systemic failures in the security protocols, but no evidence of inside assistance or conspiracy. The conclusion was that Marcus had somehow exploited a perfect storm of technical difficulties to make his escape. Rebecca was questioned extensively, of course. As Marcus's primary nurse, she was among the first people investigators wanted to speak with. Her reaction seemed entirely appropriate. She appeared genuinely distraught by Marcus's disappearance, breaking down in tears during her interview with hospital security. "I feel so responsible," she told Dr. Harrison through sobs. "I should have seen the signs. I should have recognized that he was planning something. If I'd been more vigilant, maybe I could have prevented this." Rebecca's dedication to finding Marcus was remarkable. She volunteered to work double shifts to help cover the increased security measures. She contacted local homeless shelters and community organizations, asking them to watch for Marcus and call immediately if they saw him. She even created and distributed flyers with Marcus's photo throughout Anchorage. "I know he's scared and confused," she told Dr. Torres. "He's been through so much trauma. If we can find him quickly, we might be able to prevent him from hurting himself." But 3 days later, everything changed. A homeless man named Eddie Kowalski was searching through dumpsters behind an abandoned warehouse in the industrial district when he discovered something that would haunt him for years to come. Hidden beneath piles of construction debris and frozen garbage was Marcus Chen's body. The scene was horrific. Marcus had been beaten to death with what the medical examiner would later determine was a tire iron or similar heavy metal object. The attack had been prolonged and vicious. Marcus had suffered multiple skull fractures, broken ribs, and defensive wounds on his arms and hands that showed he'd fought desperately for his life. But what puzzled investigators was the location. The warehouse was nearly 8 miles from the hospital, in an area Marcus had no known connection to. There was no evidence he'd been living there, no personal belongings, no indication of why he would have gone to such a remote location. Detective Jennifer Kowalski, who responded to the scene, would later describe it as one of the most disturbing crime scenes of her career. "It wasn't just a murder," she would tell her partner, Detective Ray Santos. "Someone had taken their time with this kid. This was personal." The initial police investigation followed standard protocols for a random violent crime. Marcus had been carrying $17 in cash and was wearing a gold watch. Probable robbery motives. The industrial district was known for drug activity and transient populations. The working theory was that Marcus had encountered the wrong people in the wrong place. Case closed within 2 weeks. What investigators didn't know was that Rebecca had met Marcus at that warehouse. Security cameras 3 blocks away had captured her distinctive white Honda Civic in the area around 9:30 p.m. on December 17th, approximately 2 hours before the medical examiner's estimated time of death. But that evidence wouldn't surface until much later, after other pieces of the puzzle had fallen into place. The day after Marcus's funeral, Rebecca Walsh requested a transfer to work more closely with Thomas Garrett. She claimed she wanted to provide him with extra support during this difficult time, since he and Marcus had become friends during their overlapping stay at Providence. Dr. Harrison approved the request immediately. After all, Rebecca had been devastated by Marcus's death. Her dedication to her remaining patients was exactly the kind of compassionate response they hoped to see from their nursing staff. No one noticed that Rebecca's grief seemed to fade remarkably quickly, or that she'd begun staying late again, having long conversations with Thomas about trust, loyalty, and what it meant to truly care about someone. The pieces were already in motion for the next disappearance. Thomas Garrett disappeared on January 8th, exactly 3 weeks before Rebecca's own vanishing act. By this time, the administration at Providence had implemented what they believed were enhanced security protocols following Marcus Chen's escape and murder. All staff members' movements were now logged electronically. Additional cameras had been installed in common areas and hallways. Patient room checks were increased to every 30 minutes during night shifts. Security guards were required to make random rounds at unpredictable intervals. None of it mattered. Thomas simply walked out of the facility during Rebecca's shift, past multiple checkpoints, through electronically locked doors, as if he possessed some kind of invisibility cloak. The security footage from that night would later be found corrupted, what the hospital's IT department classified as a catastrophic technical malfunction that affected only the cameras covering Thomas's route of escape. But one camera, a backup system in the parking garage that wasn't connected to the main network, captured something that would eventually unravel everything: Rebecca's white Honda Civic leaving the hospital at 11:15 p.m. In the passenger seat, clearly visible despite the poor lighting, was Thomas Garrett. The timestamp showed they left together just 45 minutes after Thomas was confirmed present during the 10:30 p.m. bed check. When hospital security discovered Thomas's absence during the midnight head count, Rebecca was questioned immediately. This time, her story had holes large enough to drive a truck through. "I was in the break room all evening," she told Security Chief Jim Morrison, her voice steady but her hands trembling slightly. "Check with Nurse Peterson. We were discussing new patient care protocols until well after midnight." But Nurse Peterson had clocked out at 10:30 p.m. that night. Hospital records confirmed it. The electronic badge system showed Peterson leaving through the main entrance at 10:33 p.m. Rebecca's electronic badge showed her accessing Thomas's room at 10:55 p.m., then showed no further activity until she clocked out at 7:15 a.m. the following morning, nearly 8.5 hours of missing electronic data. Dr. Torres pressed harder during a follow-up interview. She'd been watching Rebecca more closely since Marcus's disappearance, and small details that had seemed innocent before now appeared sinister in retrospect. "Rebecca, if you know something about Thomas's disappearance, you need to tell us," Dr. Torres said, her voice carefully controlled. "These are vulnerable people under our care. We have a responsibility to protect them." Rebecca's response would haunt Dr. Torres for years afterward. Instead of the concern or cooperation they expected, Rebecca's face took on an expression of almost serene certainty. "Sometimes, Dr. Torres, the only way to truly heal someone is to set them free from a system that will never understand them. Some people aren't meant to be caged, no matter how comfortable we try to make their cages." The words sent chills down Dr. Torres' spine. There was something in Rebecca's tone, a kind of maternal condescension mixed with absolute conviction, that suggested she wasn't talking about hospital protocols. 2 days later, hunters tracking elk in a remote area 40 miles outside Anchorage made a discovery that would confirm Dr. Torres's worst fears. The body of Thomas Garrett was found in an abandoned hunting cabin, partially buried under debris that suggested someone had tried to conceal it. Like Marcus Chen, Thomas had been beaten to death with a heavy object. But unlike Marcus, Thomas had fought back desperately. The cabin showed signs of a prolonged struggle. Furniture was overturned, windows were broken, and blood spatter patterns indicated Thomas had tried multiple times to escape before finally succumbing to his injuries. Most significantly, Thomas's fingernails contained skin cells that would eventually be matched to DNA found in Rebecca's apartment. Under forensic examination, investigators also found traces of Rebecca's hair on Thomas's clothing and defensive wounds on his hands that contained fibers from a sweater later found in Rebecca's closet. But perhaps the most chilling discovery was a handwritten note found clutched in Thomas's hand. "I trusted you. You said you understood. Why are you doing this?" The handwriting was confirmed to be Thomas's. The note suggested he'd had time to realize what was happening to him before he died. The night Rebecca disappeared, she left behind more than blood on her door. She left behind a carefully constructed life that was built on lies, manipulation, and 3 years of predatory behavior that had gone completely undetected. Detective Jennifer Kowalski, a 20-year veteran of Anchorage PD with experience in both homicide and sex crimes, was assigned to lead what everyone assumed would be a missing person investigation. What she found in Rebecca's modest apartment on Tennigan Avenue painted a picture of a woman who had been spiraling into a dangerous obsession for months, possibly years. The apartment itself was immaculate, almost obsessively clean. Every surface had been scrubbed with bleach so recently that the chemical smell still hung in the air. The refrigerator contained only basics: milk, bread, a few vegetables that were starting to wilt. But hidden throughout the apartment were signs of a much darker reality. In a secret compartment behind Rebecca's bedroom dresser, a space so well concealed that it took investigators 3 searches to find it, were patient files. Dozens of them. All male patients with histories of violence. All patients Rebecca had worked with over the past 3 years. But these weren't official medical files. These were Rebecca's personal notes, detailed psychological profiles that read more like a predator studying prey than a nurse caring for patients. Subject responds well to maternal authority figures. Read one entry about Marcus Chin. Deep-seated rage toward women who abandon him stems from mother's early death. Can be manipulated through strategic emotional withdrawal followed by overwhelming support. Depression and guilt can be leveraged to encourage self-destructive behavior. About Thomas Garrett, violence triggers are tied to feelings of powerlessness and emasculation. Subject craves control and will eliminate perceived threats to maintain dominance. Responds to validation of paranoid beliefs. Useful for intimidation purposes if properly directed. Detective Kowalski realized she wasn't just looking at evidence of a missing nurse. She was looking at the methodical documentation of systematic psychological manipulation spanning years. The most disturbing discovery was a detailed map of Anchorage with dozens of locations marked in different colored pins. Red pins marked primary targets, yellow pins indicated secondary options, and green pins showed safe meeting locations. 2 red locations had been circled multiple times: the warehouse where Marcus was found, and the cabin where Thomas died. But there were dozens of other marked locations throughout the city, suggesting Rebecca had been planning something much larger than 2 murders. Detective Kowalski found detailed floor plans of other psychiatric facilities in Alaska, staff schedules for multiple hospitals, and what appeared to be surveillance notes on dozens of mental health workers throughout the state. In Rebecca's computer, investigators discovered encrypted folders containing thousands of photos taken secretly in the psychiatric unit. Photos of patients in vulnerable moments, photos of staff members during private conversations, photos of security systems and access protocols. But perhaps most chilling were the audio recordings. Rebecca had been secretly recording her interactions with patients for months, capturing their most private thoughts, their deepest fears, their most violent fantasies. One recording, dated just 2 weeks before Marcus's disappearance, captured a conversation that would become key evidence in the eventual murder case. Rebecca's voice, Marcus, I need you to understand something very important. The people here, they don't really want you to get better. If you got better, they'd lose their jobs. They need you to stay sick. Marcus's voice, confused and medicated, but Dr. Harrison says the medication is helping. Rebecca, the medication is making you compliant, not better. It's numbing the pain instead of addressing the real problem. The real problem is that you survived when Jennifer and Lily didn't, and no amount of medication will ever fix that guilt. Marcus, beginning to cry, I should have died instead of them. Rebecca, maybe. But since you didn't, you have to decide what you're going to do with the life they gave you. Are you going to waste it pretending to be grateful, or are you going to honor their memory by facing the truth? The recording continued for another 47 minutes, with Rebecca systematically dismantling every positive thought or hope Marcus expressed, reinforcing his guilt and self-hatred, and gradually introducing the idea that ending his suffering might be the most honest and honorable choice he could make. Similar recordings existed for Thomas and at least 6 other patients. In each case, Rebecca used her intimate knowledge of their psychological vulnerabilities to manipulate them toward increasingly dangerous thinking. Detective Kowalski also discovered that Rebecca had been using her position to access the hospital's pharmacy, stealing medications that could be used to incapacitate victims. Inventory records showed discrepancies in several powerful sedatives over the past 6 months. Bank records revealed that Rebecca had been withdrawing large amounts of cash over the past year, always in amounts just under the reporting threshold that would trigger federal scrutiny. The total came to nearly $37,000, all of it untraceable once withdrawn. But perhaps the most disturbing evidence was found in Rebecca's personal journal, written in a code that took cryptographers 3 days to crack. They think healing means making people compliant, making them accept lives of quiet desperation. But true healing sometimes requires the ultimate release. M understood this at the end. He was grateful. T fought because his brain injury made it hard for him to accept the gift, but he understood too, eventually. The others will be more difficult, but the work must continue. Society creates these damaged souls, then tortures them with false hope. I offer them honesty. I offer them peace. Detective Kowalski realized that Rebecca Walsh hadn't just committed 2 murders. She'd been preparing for a killing spree that could have claimed dozens of victims across Alaska's mental health system. And she was still out there, with access to detailed information about vulnerable patients, armed with sophisticated psychological manipulation techniques, and completely convinced that murder was mercy. With Rebecca missing and evidence mounting that she was responsible for at least 2 murders, Detective Kowalski launched the largest manhunt in Anchorage's recent history. But Rebecca Walsh seemed to have vanished completely. Her car was found abandoned at Ted Stevens Airport, but security footage showed no one matching her description boarding any flights. Her bank accounts hadn't been accessed. Her phone was dead. The investigation took a dark turn when Dr. Harrison received a handwritten letter postmarked from Fairbanks. The work isn't finished. You created a system that tortures broken minds and calls it healing. I'm going to show you what real healing looks like. The letter was signed R.W. and included detailed information about current patients that only someone with inside access could know. Rebecca wasn't just running, she was still hunting. Police immediately increased security at Providence and other psychiatric facilities throughout Alaska. But Rebecca had 3 years' worth of patient information and the trust of dozens of violent, mentally ill men who saw her as their only ally. The question wasn't whether she would strike again, it was when and how many would die before they found her. The break in the case came from an unlikely source, Marcus Chen's brother, David, who'd been going through Marcus's belongings months after the funeral. Hidden in Marcus's old laptop, David found email exchanges between his brother and someone identified only as Angel. The emails painted Rebecca not as a caring nurse, but as someone who'd been systematically turning Marcus against his treatment team, his medication, and reality itself. "They want to keep you sick," read one email from Angel. "The medications are poison. The doctors are afraid of your potential. Meet me Thursday night and I'll show you the truth about what they've done to you." That Thursday night was December 18th, the night Marcus was murdered. The emails led police to an encrypted messaging app on Rebecca's personal phone, which her phone company had been monitoring since her disappearance. The messages painted a horrifying picture of Rebecca's final weeks before going into hiding. She hadn't just been manipulating Marcus and Thomas, she'd been in contact with at least 12 other former patients, all with histories of violence, all convinced that Rebecca was their only true advocate against a corrupt mental health system. The messages revealed the location of Rebecca's hideout, a remote cabin in Denali National Park, owned by one of her former patients who'd been discharged 6 months earlier. The tactical team surrounded the cabin at dawn on February 15th, exactly 1 month after Rebecca's disappearance. Inside, they found Rebecca Walsh along with 3 former patients she'd convinced to join her mission. The cabin was filled with detailed plans for attacks on psychiatric facilities throughout Alaska, as well as lists of current patients Rebecca intended to liberate. But what shocked investigators most was Rebecca's physical condition. She appeared to have been living in the wilderness for weeks, her clothes torn and dirty, her hair matted, showing signs of severe malnutrition and what appeared to be psychological breakdown. When Detective Kowalski first spoke with Rebecca after her arrest, the composed, professional nurse was gone. In her place was a woman convinced she was fighting a holy war against a system that tortured innocent people. "You don't understand," Rebecca repeated over and over. "They were never going to get better in your hospitals. I gave them peace. I gave them freedom from the pain." When confronted with the evidence of Marcus and Thomas's murders, Rebecca showed no remorse. "Marcus asked me to help him escape the voices in his head. Thomas begged me to end the rage that was eating him alive. I gave them what they wanted, what they needed." It became clear that Rebecca Walsh had convinced herself she was performing mercy killings, freeing her victims from psychological suffering by ending their lives. The trial of Rebecca Walsh became a media sensation that raised uncomfortable questions about the mental health system, professional boundaries, and the fine line between healing and harm. Rebecca's defense team argued she'd suffered her own psychological breakdown, triggered by years of working with severely traumatized patients without adequate support. They painted her as a victim of a system that asked too much of its caregivers while providing too little help for either patients or staff. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Maria Santos, presented a different picture: a manipulative predator who'd used her position of trust to identify vulnerable victims, systematically isolated them from proper care, and ultimately murdered them when they no longer served her purposes. Rebecca Walsh wasn't healing anyone, Santos told the jury during closing arguments. She was feeding off their pain, manipulating their suffering, and when she was done using them, she discarded them like broken toys. The evidence was overwhelming. DNA evidence linking Rebecca to both crime scenes. Digital evidence showing months of manipulation and planning. Testimony from surviving patients who described Rebecca's inappropriate behavior and boundary violations. But perhaps most damning was Rebecca's own testimony. Taking the stand in her own defense, she showed no understanding that her actions were wrong. "I loved those men," she told the courtroom. "I understood their pain in ways no one else could. When traditional medicine failed them, I offered them peace." When asked directly if she'd murdered Marcus Chen and Thomas Garrett, Rebecca's response chilled everyone present. "I freed them from a world that would never understand them. If that's murder, then I'm guilty." After 3 days of deliberation, the jury found Rebecca Walsh guilty on all charges: 2 counts of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and multiple counts of patient abuse and professional misconduct. During sentencing, Judge Robert Crawford called Rebecca's crimes a profound betrayal of the trust placed in medical professionals, and sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But Rebecca's final statement to the court revealed that she remained completely unrepentant. This system will create more victims like Marcus and Thomas. And someday, someone else will have the courage to do what I did. You can lock me away, but you can't stop what's coming. As Rebecca was led away in shackles, Detective Kowalski couldn't shake the feeling that this case was far from over. Rebecca's influence on violent psychiatric patients extended far beyond the two men she'd murdered. Her encrypted messages had reached dozens of disturbed individuals who still believed she was their savior. In the months following Rebecca's conviction, psychiatric facilities across Alaska reported a significant increase in patient violence and escape attempts. Several former patients Rebecca had contacted were found dead in apparent suicides, but investigators suspected some were actually murders made to look like self-inflicted deaths. Today, Rebecca Walsh sits in maximum security at Highland Mountain Correctional Center, serving her life sentence. But her impact on Alaska's mental health system continues to reverberate. Providence Alaska Medical Center completely overhauled its psychiatric protocols, implementing multiple safeguards to prevent staff from developing inappropriate relationships with patients. Security systems were upgraded, staff monitoring was increased, and new training programs were developed to help identify signs of professional boundary violations. Dr. Harrison, who had dismissed early warnings about Rebecca's behavior, left his position and now works as a consultant, helping other facilities recognize and prevent similar situations. I failed those patients, he admits. I was so impressed by Rebecca's apparent success that I ignored clear warning signs. Marcus Chen and Thomas Garrett died because I didn't do my job. Sarah Mitchell, the head nurse who first received the call about Rebecca's disappearance, now trains medical professionals on recognizing signs of colleague burnout and psychological deterioration. Rebecca didn't become a killer overnight, Mitchell explains during her training seminars. There were months, maybe years, of warning signs that we either missed or dismissed. We can't let that happen again. But perhaps the most lasting impact of Rebecca's crimes has been on the families of her victims. Marcus Chen's brother David has become an advocate for mental health reform, arguing that the system's failures created the conditions that allowed Rebecca to manipulate vulnerable patients. My brother was sick, but he deserved treatment, not manipulation, David says. Rebecca Walsh convinced him that death was better than healing. That's not mercy, that's murder. Thomas Garrett's ex-wife, Linda, struggles with guilt over their estranged relationship at the time of his death. Thomas had problems, but he was trying to get better, she reflects. Rebecca Walsh took away his chance to heal, to maybe rebuild his life. She stole his future and convinced him it was a gift. The case of Rebecca Walsh serves as a stark reminder that those trusted to heal can sometimes cause the deepest wounds. In a system designed to repair broken minds, she became the very monster her patients feared most, someone who gained their trust only to betray it in the most final way possible. As Detective Kowalski noted in her final report on the case, Rebecca Walsh convinced herself she was an angel of mercy, freeing suffering souls from their pain. But the only freedom she offered was death, and the only peace she brought was to her own twisted need for control. The woman hired to heal minds had indeed left a trail of blood, one that continues to stain Alaska's mental health system years after her conviction. Her victims found not healing but death, not hope but manipulation, not peace but the ultimate betrayal of trust. And in her maximum security cell, Rebecca Walsh still believes she was saving them all.